Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. We are so grateful that you're joining us on this Tuesday evening. We are so hopeful that this show tonight can not only inspire you, but motivate you in your own walk of faith. If you're new to Live with the Louhs, it's a show that marries both faith and psychology together to really give you some guiding principles that you can live by in your walk of faith. And we encourage you that if you do or have been listening to our show, to please share it with your friends and family. The show airs every single Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. right here on Ancient Faith Radio. You know, before we dive into tonight's really important topic, I do want to encourage you, as I do every week, to stay connected to us by joining our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter and Instagram, all under the headings of The Louhs. And that last name is spelled Louhs. And also, if you're wanting to listen to our sermons, Roxanne and I collaborate on every one of our sermons that we give out on Sundays. You can find all of an archive of all of our sermons simply by going to our YouTube channel and subscribing to it today. All you have to do is go to youtube.com and then simply put in The Louhs. You'll be able to get access to all of our sermons and definitely share them with your friends and family. And finally, if you want to receive a daily word of encouragement, we began sending these out a couple of years ago, and basically we just send them into your email inbox. If you're interested in receiving them, go to our website at thelouhs.com. That's Louhs.com. Click on that subscribe button, and all you have to do is simply put in your email address. Every single morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, you'll receive one of our words of encouragement. And as always, we definitely want to hear from you. We would like to hear your thoughts about our topic tonight. So if you'd like to call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or you can email me during the live broadcast of our show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. So friends, let's get started. Tonight, we're continuing a conversation that we've had several times throughout this year about the status and the state of our youth. Our children are under so much pressure that we're seeing in the world today. And I just wanted you to know that we on our show really value the importance of dedicating shows to how we can help parents and the church and people that are overseeing our youth with better tools and means to care for them. Let me share with you some recent statistics that I found in preparing for our tonight's show. You know, America's children are facing multiple challenges to their mental, physical, and health. Increasing rates of depression we're seeing, obesity and gun violence, sexual and emotional abuse are among the many factors that are harming our children today. The times that our children are growing in and are going through are extraordinary. Let me share with you these statistics. 74% of teenage girls feel an extraordinary amount of pressure to please everyone. 20 million youth in our country are struggling with a mental disorder. The third leading cause of death in this country is suicide amongst youth. And the second is through violence. I'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the fact that children around the world are also going through a tremendous amount. Nearly 200 million children live in conflict areas in the world. Between 2005 and 2020, the number of child refugees more than doubled from 4 million to around 10 million. And in 2022, an estimated 2 million children would die under the age of 5 due to hunger-related diseases. Our children are going through so much, and we, as a society, need to do more. So tonight I've invited a very dear friend of ours, Silvia Farag, to be with us. She is a therapist who does an extraordinary amount of work in making a difference in the lives of people. She's part of the Coptic Orthodox Church, a sister Orthodox church, And she does so much work, not only in the lives of her church and in her archdiocese, but also into trying to make a difference in the lives of her children and the youth that are coming across her path. And so to Silvia, welcome to Live with the Louhs. It's so great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I'm actually very happy to be back with you.
It's awesome.
So, Silvia, how do we raise kids with strong character in today's world? There's so much our kids are up against. What would you say is foundational for their character?
Well, I think we're living in a time that's very different from at least how I grew up. So we're in a time where we're the most connected in human history. It's as if our kids, those glass bottom boats that they're just constantly looking at them. They have access to everything at any time. And, one of my friends was joking and said, my son ordered a $47 Big Mac on DoorDash because he felt like having a Big Mac and he had to pay for any time access to anything. So that means any information. And they're facing some pretty hard stuff because they're challenged by what society encourages as they face these conflicting ideologies from schools, peer pressure, their friends. There's such a disconnect between those conflicting ideologies and what the church teaches as truth. So I find that young people are a lot more anxious. They're trying to cope with all this new and unknown, but without the maturity or experience of adults. And they experience a lot of stress despite our best efforts, I think. We can't just protect them from obstacles because parenting is not protecting our kids from a struggle, but preparing them for the struggle. And that's really the key. And a lot of us would love to wrap our kids in bubble wrap and never see them struggle. But if we want to raise kids with character, it's not that simple, especially in a world like this. So I think the secret to that success starts with you, with me, the parent, no one else. I could share with you really quickly a story about my kids went surfing this weekend for the first time ever. And there was a bunch of hurricanes, I guess, that plowed through the East Coast. So it affected the tide and there was a full moon. So the water was really rough. I mean, and of course, I think I should have been an actuary in a different life because all I do is assess the risk. Like, what's going to go wrong?
I'll join you as a partner.
Yes. The worst case scenario runs through my head every time. And my youngest, I think, picked up on a little bit of my nerves and my anxiety around that whole thing. So he didn't want to go. But his friends talked him into it. And he went out there. And he got pummeled, like wiped out a few times. And then he came back on because I was taking pictures. And he just was not happy. And he'd come up and say, can we please leave? I hate surfing. I don't want to do this. I can't do this. And part of me was like, I don't like surfing either. Let's go. But I didn't want to see him struggle. I didn't want to see him get hurt. But he stayed and he persisted. And he finally got just halfway up on the board before falling. And he was a different kid when he rode into the shore. He was smiling, a little bit more confident, and he just seemed happier. And he kept asking me, did you get that? Did you see that? Did you get that? So I think that's what we have to do is just, prepare them for these struggles and not remove the obstacles. It's just...
And that's so hard as parents. There's such a tendency to want to prevent the hurt, prevent the disappointment, prevent the waiting, prevent the disappointment. And I do think that kids today are not used to disappointment as much. They're not used to waiting on things as much. They're not used to having the level of gratitude for things that are now really givens to a lot of children. So some of the virtues, I think, are sort of hard pressed to be experienced. And as parents, I think sometimes the other side of allowing the discomfort is saying, hey, there's a virtue here that could be gained. Because if we don't know our why, how do we, as parents, tolerate the the hurt we see in our child, or the upset about having to not have something they want right away, is that there's something sanctifying, right, in that process of watching our children experience that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's how you build resilience, right? That's how we bring up resilient kids is not removing the obstacles, but preparing them for when they do face those tough times to learn how to bounce back. And when they're coddled, it just doesn't happen.
Right. You know, I agree with you totally, Roxanne, with regards to just the importance of us building up resilient children, and what you were mentioning, Silvia, as well. I think, you know, when we look at this, the landscape of what our youth are going through, just in general, I mean, we can't help but think how different the landscape has changed over the last 5 years, or even the last several years, where we're seeing that, you know, gun violence is one of the top leading causes of death for our youth. I mean, we're dealing with issues of the questions of our own identity, who we are, you know, not to mention, you know, high levels of depression, mental disorders that we're seeing them impacted with. You know, when we canvass that, it's one of those things that, you know, not only do we have to balance this idea of building up resilient children, but we also have to recognize that what they're being bombarded with on a day-to-day basis, you know, there's a balance that has to kind of take place where they're dealing with things that, you know, just even a generation or two prior to this would have seemed so foreign from now. I mean, when you see your patients, and especially those that are children, I mean, how do you kind of guide them to almost build in that resiliency within themselves? What would you tell the parents that are listening here tonight about how to strengthen our children to deal with the things that they're being faced with?
Is that question for myself or
for you? Yeah, I'm sorry, for you,
okay.
Sylvia. Yes, please. Yeah.
So, you know, the beauty of what we're doing here today is that we are able to balance that with the values and virtues of the kingdom of God, right? So we have to start with the end in mind. That's like the ultimate goal. We can't protect them from what is happening in the world. But we have to prepare them. So how do we do that? I find a lot of the kids that are walking into my door are not able to talk to their parents about certain things. Mm-hmm. They're either going to get in a ton of trouble, or things are not known. There's a lot of secrecy, or they don't feel safe enough because mom or dad tend to be very harsh. And yell or judge or take things away. So there has not been a connection that's been made between the kids and their parents. So if you can't talk to mom and dad, then you can Google it, or you can ask Alexa, or you can figure it out. And they turn to unhealthy coping, the fixes that we fear as parents that our kids would turn to. When we don't have these conversations at home. And I will say this the entire time, everything starts at home. And there is somehow a disconnect. I find that I like to foster a conversation, teach mom and dad and their kids how to talk without blaming, without shaming, make it safe, open up, right? So we're told we have to connect before we correct. And sometimes we just want to correct. We just want to lecture. And you'd be surprised at how many of us take this piece for granted and not take the time to connect first.
I love that. I do think there's such a struggle in being able to sit with something that you're hearing that is, like barbed wire, and like you're trying to climb over barbed wire. And, you want to gently guide without sort of coming in with these harsh reactions. And I think it's so common and almost unconscious for parents to react in those situations where you're hearing things that, are really scary and really unnerving and uncomfortable. And so what would you say to parents who need to be able to enter an experience enough to understand it, enough to get all the onion layers peeled back before sort of the guidance comes in, and to make it safe for their kids to talk so that, their parents can listen.
Well, I think parenting requires endless patience, and it's not the patience that puts up with like inappropriate behavior, but the patience that intervenes effectively, repeatedly, as long as your child is struggling, right? Like, we have to check ourselves. So if we're patient, this allows your child the opportunity to struggle, but that means they're going to grow, they're going to learn. And they're going to acquire these values and these virtues, the character we're talking about, that they are going to need as adults. But patience means that we respond consistently and appropriately every time they struggle. Because we've got those beautiful long-term goals in mind. And the problem is a lot of us don't do that, right? It's the hardest part comes to sticking to your guns, right? Whining, crying, angry outbursts. Don't change your mind. You have to follow through. That's the hardest part. I know I don't do it. But when they know that mom and dad have a backbone of steel, case is closed. That's it. And I think the follow through and the consistency is so important. I mean, I was once so tired that I canceled Christmas. I'm like, that's it. Christmas, I'm not. Of course I didn't follow through. They called my bluff. But it's important to be patient and to check in with yourself too. Like, what is my child triggering me and right.
But how, I love how you're sharing the importance of the parents being on the same page. What would you say are some tools just to kind of help those parents who are tuning in tonight? What would you say are some ways that parents outside of that initial communication with their child about the topics that we're talking about tonight, or even the struggle that child may have, what are some tools that you would recommend for those for the parents to kind of come together to have some sort of like some rules that they follow when they're at times being pinned one against the other?
Oh, our kids are so good at doing that too, right? I think it's important to talk about this as a team, as one, and invite each other into the conversation. That it's really important when this is happening that you check in with me and see if, in fact, I agree to allow them to have social media account, something like that, right? We have to be on the same page, but it's more than that. We have to talk. We have to know what's going on. And there's usually one parent that seems to be more on top of this stuff than the other. It's just, one has certain strengths, then one has the other strength. It's complementary. I monitor my kids' social media stuff. My husband, he doesn't have social media, so it's not just not important to him. He knows I've got it. So he trusts that I will let him know when something we need to talk about, when there's something we need to talk about, we'll do it together, and be on the same team and not argue about it in front of them. We can argue about it later. But that's really important. Team. There's so many things that we can do as parents.
Right. And I think all of these topics, I know that in our own home, there's certain things that I love that we do this, is that where we just kind of, when we feel like one of our children are trying to, get something maybe out of one of the parents, one of us, is that we have just some certain things that we're like, well, we'll think about it. We'll just kind of delay the response, because just to give the courtesy to the other parent to have that kind of conversation, to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I think that's so important. But I do think it's very, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but it's so important that the family itself has a mission statement, that it has core values that they're going to stand for. And it's an exercise that I would recommend every family to do. If you don't have a family mission statement, a statement that your family always goes back to, that knows that this is the core principles that we have in our family, like the Bible says, without a vision, the people perish. And so the importance of having that kind of core mission statement, along with a Bible verse that is that speaks to your family. I mean, creating such a Bible verse. I know in our family, as I mentioned in a sermon I gave a couple weeks ago in discussing about the family, Ours is where it says, "For lo, that I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear, for God is with us." And that's something that both of our children felt very much called to. It was kind of a beautiful experience, but both of our children felt that was the Bible verse that really anchored them. And so, again, I think it's just one of those things that you can incorporate your children with in describing what are the values that the Low household, the Farish household, that your household is going to believe in that are non-negotiables. What are the values that we're going to stand for, and what are the things that we're not going to stand for? And having an open and honest conversation, not only as parents, but also including our children in that conversation. I think it's a very, very powerful thing. I do want to invite all of you, if you are interested in speaking with Silvia Farag. She's a therapist, and we're talking about what our children are facing today. We'd love to hear from you. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346, or you can email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And again, that number is 1-855-237-2346. Silvia, we got this question that just came in that I think I'm sure a lot of parents are getting this question a lot, especially in today's world. It says, in a society where one often feels like a minority without a tattoo, what is the Orthodox perspective on tattoos? And how do we broach this topic with our youth? What would you recommend to a parent who asks you this question? How would you go about doing that? Not only what is the Orthodox perspective on it, but more importantly, how would you broach the topic with them, with our youth?
I would like to see and invite the parents in and see what their beliefs around tattoos are, how they do it in their home. I wish there was a one size fits all. I mean, you might be able to speak more, Father, to the Orthodox understanding of that. I know, I have, my daughter wanted to get a second piercing, and I said, absolutely not. Your body is a temple. We talk about this all the time. But when it came to tattoos, because we as Copts, we have, traditionally, we have the Coptic cross on the inside of our right wrist. And that has become very much a symbolism of who we are as Copts, because it was a mark, and when we entered church, for them to know that we belonged to this church in Egypt, that we weren't going, we weren't somehow sneaking in or up to no good. That was almost like our ID card. And it's become a beautiful symbol of faith. I personally don't have one. It's just my personal belief was what I told my kids: would you put a bumper sticker on a McLaren? And they said no. I said, okay, so you have to treat your body as such. But that's my personal feeling. So I think that's in every family. You have to just discuss what's okay with mom and dad. But I will allow you to speak on what the church feels.
Arsen, do you have any comments or thoughts on this?
I would echo what Silvia has just shared. I mean, this is just another example. I mean, we see that with the struggle with piercings, with tattoos, with what to do with our hair, with bleaching, with, and so, yeah, I mean, ultimately everything we do to our body, if we can't say that it's for his glory, and listen, I mean, that can be stretched, right? Because if somebody lacks the confidence to go out and use God's gifts to do things in the world because they are so insecure and struggling in certain aspects of themselves, and you gave them something aesthetic, and it really brought them out of their shell. Well, then now they're doing things that have been uniquely equipped within them to do in this world, and you can see sort of God's glory coming true in that situation. To me, it worked for good, right? And so I think that we sort of have to look at what is the motivation, what is this going to do for the soul, for the character, for the person, and I think, as you said, it's really hard with a one size fits all, because there are people who battle immense insecurities, and it really does stifle their abilities to go out and do and use the gifts God has given them.
I love both of what you're sharing. I definitely agree that it is the motivation behind whatever we do with anything that we do, much less tattooing and piercing, needs to be at the forefront of the conversation. And I think it's wise, which you were sharing, Sylvia, as well, that we have an opportunity to have the parents actually have a genuine conversation. I think that oftentimes, people can respond and react to just the actual tattooing as if that's the only thing. But I think the deeper question would be is, how am I using my body, my spirit, my soul, my words? How am I using that to give God glory and allow that, having that deep and sincere conversation with it? I think if we're honest with ourselves, more of what we're seeing in the world today, I would say, is not necessarily doing that. I think a lot of that's becoming much more of a, art that people, that people are yearning for, and there's a beauty in that, I guess. I think, though, that for us as Orthodox Christians, and really as Christians in general, I just would always ask you, what is the intent behind it? What is your true motivation? When you get deep, what is the motivation behind it? And hopefully, when you get to that, there's a revelation that comes about, not to mention the areas of the scripture that talk about how our bodies should be vessels and should be utilized ultimately for God's glory. Here's another question that just came in as well. The question says,
I think I see it right here.
Yeah.
May God continue to bless this ministry. I'm struggling to find the right tools to help my child who's suffering from low self-esteem, lack of confidence in herself, anxiety, social anxiety, lack of peer support, lack of desire to be in school. And all of that is coming from the above factors of the confidence, anxiety, and low self-esteem. I know the society we live in doesn't help, and my prayers are keeping me afloat to not lose hope. But I feel powerless in front of this problem, and I'm asking God for wisdom and knowledge to be a bit of help to my child. How can I help besides leaning on my faith?
That's an excellent question, because there really are some hands-on tools you can use, right? So I'm not going to go through the 7 C's of resilience, all of them, but they're excellent. I highly recommend that you give that a read. But the 7 C's are scientifically evidence-based tools that you use to build resilience in children and teens. I believe it's competence, confidence, contribution, character, coping. I mean, they're incredible. But the first thought that came to mind as we were reading that, Dr. Roxanne, was, to build competence in a child is just that, pushing them to do the surfing when they want to quit, right? Just aiding this sense of independence. It sounds like she needs, or he needs, given that this depression doesn't need to be addressed, but successful kids have this strong sense of self that isn't easily compromised by external influences. And that is developed by encouraging kids to work independently, to solve problems, critically think about things. I saw this video by Adam Grant. He's a organizational psychologist, and he said, how do you when I build resilience in kids, I did this with my daughter who was doing a play in school, and she was a little nervous and had some stage fright. So he does a lot of talks, and he told her, I'm a little nervous about this podcast. What do you think I should do? He invited her into the conversation. He allowed her to share her thoughts and her opinions. He listened. He actually was present and listening to what she was saying and to his suggestions. So when it came to her turn, to get on that stage, he said the same thing. Well, what do you think would be the best thing that you could do and get out there? And it was wonderful. So, when you're really controlling as a parent, that kind of feeds into that low self-confidence by telling our kids what to do all the time, and it creates this unhealthy dependence. We want our kids to think for themselves and make decisions within our guardrails, right? Within our values and virtues. So the goal is to raise a kid who's independent but emotionally connected to us in healthy ways. So I would encourage you to speak to your child maybe about stepping out of their comfort zone. It could be something like trying a new sport, doing something that they normally wouldn't do, like the surfing, for example, or something social, and just allowing them to struggle while you're there through it, and you might be pleasantly surprised with the outcome, right? Because that's where they learn. It's in the struggle.
Yeah. And, I think that's so important, just that exposure to different things and sort of getting outside the comfort zone of what everyone else may be doing, because maybe we were uniquely equipped to do something different. And I do think that, kids sort of seem to gain their confidence from the things that they've been noticed for early on or consistently throughout their life. And I think sometimes, when we look at our children, we think things that we don't always say. Sometimes I'm wowed by a character trait or something I see in my child, but I can't say that I always put words to it, that it may be something I register or think like, that's incredible. But did I say it? Did I share it? And I've noticed that the things that we have shared have seemed to stick and become a source of confidence. Interestingly, for our daughter, ever since she was little, this used to really get her into trouble, but she was quite the curious type, and she was also quite the independent type and pretty resourceful. And that could have come from her older brother kind of being, with us most of the time and less curious, less inquisitive. And so she kind of discovered the world on her own as the younger sibling. And over time, we would sort of look and see, well, she sort of solved that on her own, or that's just, she went and got that when she needed something, to solve this task. And we would say, well, that's really resourceful, or that's really, wow, I can't believe you sort of solved that problem. And now here she's ninth grade and she was applying for something as an ambassador at school, which is someone who I guess introduces new kids to the school. And when they asked her, hey, well, why do you think you should do this? She said, well, I think I'm pretty resourceful and I think I can help kids get what they need when they come to the school. And I thought, well, that's so interesting because it's just something small that we kind of noticed in her, but it became a source of something she, I guess, saw as a strength. And so just a small example of things that sometimes we're looking for the big things, we're looking for is my kid going to be the top of this or the top of that or this. And I think God has sort of uniquely equipped each of us with just very different and specific gifts. And if we really start to look for what do they tend to do just kind of naturally, that nobody had to really teach. And it wasn't hard, for them to learn it. It could eventually become, one of their gifts that becomes a source of their confidence, and it doesn't go anywhere because it was intrinsic. And so just looking for little things like that, I think, can be a fun tool for parents too.
I love that. I mean, it doesn't have to be goal oriented all the time. And this, tied to an achievement or an accomplishment.
Right.
But it could be something almost like, I say this to some families. Are you, when your child comes home from school, are you happy to see them when they walk in the door? Light up when they walk in the room. So you got to check yourself. They will notice when you look up from your laptop or your phone and you're smiling and you're actually happy to see them. That kind of stuff really counts.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, the other day, my daughter said, the happiest time of my day is when you come into my room. And you just come in. It's this moment of value happened. Yeah. And not that I was looking to assign value, but the value kind of happened. So I think it's sometimes we're looking as parents for all these really big things. And often what I'm reminded of when I look up and say, thank you, God, for showing me what's important. It's these small things, that I think kids sort of begin to define and feel some level of value. And I'd say look for the virtues as a start. Which of the virtues do they tend to sort of, one of my 4-year-olds in the Sunday school class just gave me a thank you card. Thank you for being my first Sunday school teacher. and I said to the mother, wow, did you have her do that's incredible. She says, oh no, she did it on her own.
Wow.
Gratitude, just, emitted from her. And so again, like, looking for these virtues in our kids that are kind of naturally there, I think become a source of confidence that nobody can take away.
I love that. That's such a beautiful thing. You're listening to Live with the Louhs. We're so grateful that you're joining us this evening. We are speaking with what our children are faced with each and every day. We're speaking with a dear friend and therapist, Silvia Farag, about this topic. And we invite you to call us if you have a question or a comment. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346, or email us a question during the live broadcast of the show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Silvia, as we're talking about, really, as parents, we all struggle at times to be the right parents. I mean, we make mistakes. All of us do, no matter who we are, and no matter how gifted we think that we may be, we struggle. We can all make mistakes. What are some of the common mistakes that you see parents make a lot in your office and in parenting?
I just did it yesterday. I was under the gun.
Didn't we all?
Last night, and we were driving home from our little weekend getaway. It was late, and I had my laptop with me, and I was a little nauseous because we were driving, and I was working, and I all of a sudden had this deadline. Someone needed something by yesterday. So my daughter kept tapping me on the shoulder. She was sitting in the back between her brothers, and all she wanted was for me to approve more time on Audible. And I was ignoring her and just buried into my work. And then Mom. And I snapped. I'm like, yeah, you have to wait. Can't you see I'm doing something? And I felt terrible. And she fell asleep by the time, I 2-3 minutes later, I turned around to say, I'm sorry, which is a very common mistake. We have to recognize when we make a mistake and apologize to our kids. Because isn't that the most powerful tool that we have as parents to model? So, it ate me up all night, and I felt terrible. She didn't even remember. But it's not uncommon for us to doubt our approach sometimes because we're so overwhelmed. Did I love them enough? Did I do enough? But kids are not looking for attention. They're looking for connection. It is central, and kids are they're wired to seek it. When you're on the phone and all of a sudden everything was quiet, but as soon as mom gets on the phone, it's like, what happened? It's the witching hour, because they can feel we disconnected from them. They feel it. And
not available.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
I heard someone put it like, our kids don't need more presents. They need us to be present.
I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
we do
I think
experiences
it does
now. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Instead of these big, ridiculous tech gifts that every 10 minutes something new comes out, we do experiences for their birthdays or their and it doesn't have to be anything crazy, just a day together. We go see a show or go do something that they want to do. You're present with your child and forming core memories. They're never going to forget it.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we sometimes forget that it's also, it's okay to verbalize when we are struggling with something ourselves. And it sort of introduces this sort of perspective taking for kids to know where they stop and you begin, that my reaction isn't because you're not valuable. In that situation, your reaction wasn't because she wasn't valuable. It was because I've got this incredible deadline and so much on me, and I'm nauseous in the car. And, sometimes we don't always verbalize, because especially as parents, we absorb. And we don't always put words on everything that we're absorbing. And so no one knows, and suddenly we react and kids are like, oh man, like, does mom just not care about me? Well, of course not, And so I do think that there's some merit in putting words on what we experience, and just being able to say, hey, I've had a very overwhelming day. I don't have a lot of energy at this point in my day. Or I want to connect, but I probably need to disconnect first. I need maybe half hour to go walk outside, and then I think I'll be more ready, able to listen. I find myself communicating that sometimes. I want to hear you, but I can't. Like I can't tune in the way you need me to. Can give me some time. And I think it's good for kids to see that too, because it's sort of, again, perspective taking, but they also then don't take it personally. They don't personalize our reactivity or our lack of wanting to respond, because it's not usually about them and what they're doing, but more so about what's on our plates that we don't always share.
But that also teaches them how to tune in with what they're feeling and to be aware. I love that,
Sylvia, we have another question, an email. We have actually several email questions that are coming in live onto the show. Here's one that's definitely a very difficult question, but the question is this. It says, our teenage daughter is threatening to cut herself and burn herself. How should we handle this? Sylvia, you want to start, and then maybe Roxanne, you can add as well.
You need to seek professional help. Absolutely. The self-harm is becoming very common among teens and tweens, and they're getting really good at hiding it. So it's not always obvious. First of all, it's great that you are aware of this, but now the next step is we need to actually seek help. She needs professional
Sylvia,
help.
Not to interrupt you, but I think, for some of the parents that are here, that are listening, may not be aware about why is this. First of all, talk to us about what this self-harm is. Why are our young teenagers cutting themselves or finding hurt or hurting themselves physically? What's behind all that?
So self-harming means they're hurting themselves on purpose, right? So they might self-injure for many reasons. It's non-suicidal, but so for some kids, it kind of almost feels like a relief, like taking the lid off the pressure cooker. So the other thing that they're struggling with that hurts so much and that they're struggling with so much, that physical pain distracts them from it for a moment, right? So it sometimes, though, can lead to a lot more risky behavior. It helps them cope. It's a very unhealthy coping strategy. It directs the emotion inward, right? So they don't take anything out openly or discuss it, or they might feel very isolated. So somehow this has become the way they cope, and it's unhealthy, it's dangerous, and it requires professional help.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Roxanne, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is the intensity of emotion that is completely dysregulated, and we're not learning how to manage. And, we don't all come into the world with the same disposition. Some people, things happen to them. It's duck off a water's back. They don't hold it. Other people, the intensity is so great that they don't have the capacity to manage just the intensity of their own experiences, and they don't know how to move on from things. And thoughts can be so intrusive and stick around, and they can't move on from it. And so, it becomes this sort of distraction. And I would say, in the more severe cases, they are trying to manage their emotions. And in less severe cases, they're looking for someone to say, hey, I see you. Hey, I see you. And there's a lot of people who will self-injure in ways that can be seen. And those are the people saying, hey, I need you to see me. For whatever reason, they're
right. It may not be about the
struggling in some level. They're saying, hey, I need you to see what's happening for me. But either way, counseling is huge, and dialectical behavior therapy is great for that, because it teaches kids how to tolerate and handle that emotional intensity that they're not equipped to know how to manage. That they can do great things with in the world if they learn how to manage and regulate it.
Great points. Great points. We are speaking with Silvia Farag. She is a therapist. We're talking about what our children are facing today, friends, and we're so grateful that you're joining us on Live with the Louhs. And we invite you, if you'd like to, there's about another 15 minutes left of our show, to give us a call if you have a question for Silvia. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or email me a question during the live broadcast of our show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
So it looks like we have another question that's just come in. And this one probably speaks to a lot of kids' experience in today's world. And the writer says, my children are in third grade in kindergarten this year. How do I talk to them about gender in a way that is both loving and also upholding truth taught by the Orthodox Church? Mm-hmm. Even in the third grade at 8 years old, my daughter is already encountering other students who identify as they or them or the opposite gender to their sex. This is very confusing for kids. And what would you say to this parent who, I'm sure this speaks to the masses of parents who are looking for how to respond to some of what our kids are dealing with?
These conversations have to happen. They absolutely have to happen at home. They're difficult conversations, but we have to discuss these things with our kids at the age appropriate, as much as they can understand. So the way I speak to my third grader will be different than how I speak to my sixth grader. Mm-hmm. But they, like what we said in the beginning of this talk, is that they will get the information if they want to find out. And it's not going to be around our values. So I encourage you to speak to your child about the values and virtues that you hold as an Orthodox family. And just what Father Nick said, your mission statement, who we are, the non-negotiables. Yes, maybe our neighbor does that, but in our home, we do this. And that's okay. And build them up that they understand their identity in Christ and their identity in their family and their connection to the values and virtues of the kingdom of God. So have those conversations. Don't broach them. Absolutely have them. I just did a pornography talk for 10-year-olds, and a lot of the parents didn't want their children to attend because they thought their kids were not aware, never seen any inappropriate pictures. I'm like, your child has a device. Your child, unfortunately, has seen. So now it's time that we teach what is happening, what they saw, what they need to do to prevent this from going further.
Anyway, I think that's so wise, to be able to walk into these conversations. And I do think, and speaking of some of the greatest mistakes that, we're seeing across the board as parents are, thinking their kids have not experienced or have not been exposed to. And so they're not having those conversations. Or if it does come up, they're kind of quick to want to brush it aside, without really a thorough explanation. And I think these are conversations that are important to have at home with parents, but I think they're also important to have with your priest, because what is truth in light of what we see with gender today? This is a big topic. In fact, we should probably do a show on just that, because there's so much to be said. And I know how we would speak to our children about these sort of situations. We had just a conversation the other day as we were walking, in trying to sort of show a different understanding to what they're seeing. It's not always what we think is behind. They know you got to peel back the onion later, and everybody has a story. And learning to sort of understand that and make room for that, knowing that we're also called to love those people, but also understand, there's a vast array of variables that define and kind of come together to create these experiences. But I think that we have to have a firm foundation ourselves in how we're looking at it if we're going to be able to have that conversation with our children. And we also don't want to be super condemning, right? Because, I mean, again, if we look at how Christ handled situations like this, he had this amazing way of just saying, hey, I love you, you have value to me, hey, but just change this direction, and there was no harsh condemnation. There was just love. And I think that we're struggling to do that today. I think we have lost complete sight of truth as well. So we have polarizations happening, and all the middle ground is lost. And so kids have two extremes with which they are being taught. And I think as parents, we have to represent what is truth, and what does that look like in a loving and empathetic and kind and compassionate way that holds true to who we're supposed to be. So I think involving priests in these conversations is also, really good. Nick, what do you have to say on that?
I think you both answered it beautifully. I mean, the Bible speaks about this throughout the scripture. St. Paul talks about these two, speaks about these two important words, grace and truth. So that there needs to be this grace that you're talking about, Roxanne, this love, this compassion that so often is missing. But there also has to be truth. I mean, and we can't negotiate on that. I think sometimes what's ended up happening is that you have sometimes too much of the truth and not enough grace, or too much grace where it's like,
right.
well, hey, if this is who you are, just go ahead and do it,
Right.
With no truth. And so obviously within the realms of a church, I would say a church that is grounded in both of those core values of grace and truth, then, you have a way of approaching it in a way that's loving, compassionate towards people, but at the same time, non-negotiable on those values that we know that are part of the very fabric of our scriptures and of our traditions of a church. So I think grace and truth are all about how we need to handle not just this topic, which is such a big topic, but I think every topic that we come across. I mean, we have to remember that in John chapter 8, Jesus takes the woman that at that time she was accused of adultery, and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, brings her and they throw her in front of them. And at that time, someone that had committed adultery, the punishment was death. It wasn't a slap on the wrist or divorce; it was death. They would oftentimes stone them, and Jesus would. And one of the most, I think, iconic visuals that we can have, that we see in Scripture, is that he just simply goes and puts his finger on the ground. And the tradition in the Orthodox Church is that he begins to write out all of the sins of the Pharisees. And then he simply says to the Pharisees, we never hear a reply back from the Pharisees at all. He simply just he gets up from from where he was seated, writes on the sand, and then he says to them, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." And then all it says is that the Pharisees leave grumbling and upset. No comment to that, because they saw firsthand what it is. And so, again, going back to that whole importance that none of us are without sin. We all have struggles. And if we want people to look at us with grace and truth, and that's the same lens that we should look at people as well.
It reminds me of this beautiful quote that I read, and it stays with me always. Sinners judging sinners for sinning differently.
Right. And that's what we have. And we've all come into this world with a unique set of baggage and dispositional qualities and struggles and sins and things that we have to fight and understand within ourselves. But we can't be afraid to talk about those things. And so I love that you've mentioned that we should be stepping into those conversations. If you don't feel comfortable, step into it with your priest.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I know there's so many more questions that have come in here, and I'm looking at the time. We've only got 7-8 more minutes here. But what would you say is one of the most important tools, that we as parents can be giving our children?
I mean, we said the most important tool I think we as parents have is modeling, right? Because we have to live out what we're teaching them. They're always learning and we're always teaching, even when it's quiet, how we react in the car. This is so important, is for us to model how we want our children to live. It's everything that we fear in adolescence, everything we don't want for our kids, whether it's the cutting, the self-harming that we discussed, or unhealthy relationships. It's not kids trying to be bad. It's just kids trying to take away their pain because of the lack of coping skills. So if we don't model at home when things are tough, right? When we're going through a little bit of a difficult time or stressful time, what are they learning, right? Telling them what not to do by shaming them doesn't work. We have to live that out. So I think the most important thing for us as parents to do is to manage your own stress. It is so important to notice what's going on with you within yourself. So if kids are consistently in this stressful environment, it impacts them in a ton of ways. They can sense the stress, just like my son Christian can sense how I was nervous about letting him go surf. And they sense it and they feel responsible. So this doesn't free them to focus on what they should be doing as kids. Instead, they worry about things that they can't even begin to comprehend because they're not mature adults. So make your home a positive place by using good stress management and modeling healthy ways to deal with stress. You are teaching by example. If you struggle in this area, then get some help.
I could not echo that enough. I had a woman, an adult woman, the other day tell me, I have porous boundaries. I'm still learning how to recognize what I think and feel, because growing up, no one ever gave me the room to. I was told what to do and when to do it. I was called away from things I was doing to accommodate what my parents wanted me to do at all times. And I never had a moment to really even acknowledge what I thought, felt, and needed. And so in today, as an adult, I don't know. And her boundaries are, she's having to work so hard at just being able to say no and to recognize what she needs. And so, managing our stress as adults, helps our kids learn to recognize the emotions that they're having and what that means about them and how they can solve things and what they, need to do to move forward through an emotion. Otherwise they don't even know they're having and they take it out on people. Right. And so, I cannot echo that enough as adults and as parents, that we have to be managing our stress so that our homes are led with grace and love.
Just to kind of in the last few moments, I think one of the things I would encourage our listeners as well is to make sure that in addition to that modeling, that modeling doesn't simply just apply to the way in which we want them to act, but also our spiritual walk of faith. I mean, the reality is that only 11%, studies are showing that only 11% of families actually pray. That's extraordinary. And when we're looking at statistics that show that only 3% of Christians actually read their Bibles on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if we are trying to raise up what we would call successful, godly children that are raised in the ways of the Lord, as the Bible says, then we have to ask ourselves, are we modeling it in every facet? Because I think we do. Sometimes we can kind of get that, more in, are we modeling it in the way when we're dealing with a conflict, or are we dealing with it in how we want them to communicate with one another? But what grade would we give ourselves when it comes to modeling how well we're living out our faith? Making Christ a priority, praying before we eat, reading our scriptures, talking about what we heard on Sunday in a sermon. I know every Sunday at our home, one of the topics that we have oftentimes is simply about, what did we get out of Dad's sermon this today? What were the topics about? How does that apply to us? And also reading the Bible, making sure that our children see that. I have found that, like the old adage of more is caught than taught, applies to every facet of our life as parents. So, we talk about this important about, how we're communicating with them, but I would also say, watch how we're living in front of them, how we're acting towards them in every facet of our life. Wouldn't you agree with that, Silvia? And I know, Roxanne, I know you feel the same way.
Oh, absolutely. I think the greatest gift you can give your child is to live a life that's balanced, that glorifies God, and demonstrate that when you're faced with those challenges, and we all are, that you actually take the active steps you need to bounce back, that you don't fall apart or turn to unhealthy fixes.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, and Silvia, as always, we just want to take this opportunity to thank you again. You're such a dear friend to us, but also just taking the time to be with us on Live with the Louhs this evening. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. I love being on with you guys. I adore you both. God bless what you're doing. And this ministry is so, so needed and so valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank God. Thank God. And always, Roxanne's always great having you with me. We're in the same room, but in two different computers. So we're trying to operate this evening. But we want to thank all of you for taking the time to be with us this evening. We just love having you. And we want to thank Matushka Trudy. Matushka means presbytera, or a priest wife. Matushka Trudy is an extraordinary woman of faith who produces every one of our shows. In fact, every show here on Ancient Faith Radio she produces, and does an amazing job in doing that. And so I want to thank Matushka Trudy for doing so. Friends, next Tuesday, we're dedicating the show to 9/11. It's going to be the 22nd anniversary of 9/11, and we're speaking with Father Andreas Vilthukas, who is the parish priest of the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox National Shrine at Ground Zero. This is the first time that he's been on here on our radio, and the first time here on Ancient Faith Radio. You don't want to miss this show about how St. Nicholas the Shrine is impacting so many people, thousands of people every single day who are visiting the World Trade Center, but also seeing a beacon of hope and light that's found in Christ in that little shrine that's there at the trade where the World Trade Centers were. So definitely be with us. That's next Tuesday. My friends, God bless you all, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with The Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.